Hey guys, so yesterday we just went over the new 2022 Senate polls that were released, but a whole ton of new governor polls have also been released for this year's midterm elections. In the last 2 days, new polls have been added for the states of Georgia, Nevada, Michigan, Texas, and Arizona. All 5 of these states are major races on the ballot this November, and in this video we'll be going over the new numbers that were just released and what they mean for either party in these crucial Senate races. And so starting off with the state of Georgia, in the latest poll released here, Stacey Abrams is down by 7 points against Brian Kemp. This race is a completely identical rematch to the race that we saw in 2018, where Brian Kemp won by one of the closest margins of the previous midterm cycle. In 2018, Brian Kemp defeated Stacey Abrams by a margin of just 1.4%. I mean, this was the closest race of the year, with the exception of Tony Evers' race in Wisconsin and the election of Ron DeSantis in Florida, in which he defeated Andrew Gillum. So Georgia really was a very tight race in the previous election cycle, and right now the polling data simply suggests that 2022 is not going to be the same as 2018. In 2018, Brian Kemp was not the incumbent governor, and if you looked at the polling for the previous election, you'll see that Stacey Abrams towards the very end led and was tied to Brian Kemp in many of the final polls that were released. This time around in 2022, Stacey Abrams has failed to lead in a single poll that has been released for the Georgia gubernatorial election. In every single poll, Stacey Abrams has been behind Brian Kemp. And I mean, Brian Kemp is very popular within his party, even though he denied Donald Trump the presidential election win in Georgia after the election. He still won 74% of the Republican Party's vote in the GOP primary earlier this year. He defeated former Senator David Perdue, who won at just 22%. I mean, for a former senator to win 22% in a primary is absolutely abysmal. And David Perdue got so much money and so much backing from the former president. Donald Trump was one of the biggest endorsers of David Perdue, and still David Perdue lost to Brian Kemp by an astonishing margin. So Brian Kemp right now is a very electable candidate, and even though the Democratic Party has had many recent wins in Georgia, it simply is not a blue state at this point. It very much is a purple state with a very long Republican voting history. If you look at the general congressional ballot polling right now, the Democratic Party is down by 1.8% nationwide. In 2018, when Stacey Abrams was able to do much surprisingly well, the Democrats were up by 8.6%. So really, the national environment right now is just completely different compared to what it was 4 years ago. And Stacey Abrams, she will continue to remain a major player in Democratic politics in the state of Georgia. I mean, of course, in 2020, she helped Joe Biden win Georgia on the presidential level for the first time since 1992. And on the Senate level, she helped both Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock win their runoff races, giving the Democratic Party the majority in the Senate. So Stacey Abrams is the best possible candidate the Democratic Party could have nominated in this race. But right now, just considering the national trends and the fact that Brian Kemp is the incumbent governor, Stacey Abrams simply is not polling well enough right now for her to win this race. I think that the race can tighten in the next couple of months, but realistically, the race is going to go to Brian Kemp. If you look at the betting odds here, 82% chance that it goes to the GOP, just 19 for the Democrats. And realistically, the Democratic Party really did not have too much of a shot at this race. If Brian Kemp lost the primary and David Perdue were the Republican nominee, I think Stacey Abrams would have a much better chance. But right now, Brian Kemp is a relatively strong incumbent going into the re-election year, and I do think that Brian Kemp is going to end up winning the race in Georgia. And currently, looking at the polling average, he is ahead by 6.3%. So Georgia will be a likely state on this map here, and over the course of this video, of course, we'll be filling in the other states on this map. And so now moving on to the state of Nevada, where we also have a very important governor's race here as well, with Steve Sisolak running for re-election as the Democratic incumbent. Of course, in 2018, Sisolak was elected to his first term in office, defeating Adam Laxalt. Yes, the same Adam Laxalt that is now running against Kathleen Cortez Masto on the Senate level. But this November, on the gubernatorial level, we will be seeing a race between Steve Sisolak and Joe Lombardo. Lombardo is currently the Clark County Sheriff. Clark County is the county that Las Vegas is located in. So, of course, it is by far the most important county in the state of Nevada. And so, looking at the latest poll released here between Sisolak and Lombardo, currently Steve Sisolak leads on average by a margin of 1.3%. But if you look at the most recent poll release, Steve Sisolak is up by 3% against Joe Lombardo, and this poll was conducted by Emerson College, who has an A- rating on 530. So Emerson College is a pretty reliable pollster. If you look at the other polls released, Steve Sisolak has consistently been dominating in the polls. The most recent poll showing Joe Lombardo ahead was funded by a Republican partisan sponsor, and in this poll, Lombardo only leads by 1%. Now, polling has been pretty accurate in the last couple of years for Nevada. In 2018, Steve Sisolak Sisolak won by a margin of 4.1%, and the polls showed a pretty close race. The polls actually overestimated Adam Laxalt. A lot of the final polls actually showed Laxalt leading, and Sisolak did not lead by 4% in very many polls at all. There were only 2 polls released in the month of October showing Steve Sisolak up by more than 4%, and so really the polls were pretty accurate in 2018, and they didn't overestimate the Democrats at all. On the Senate level in 2018, when Jackie Rosen defeated Dean Heller, this was a major race as well. On the Senate level, this was a flip for the Democratic Party, but if you looked at the polls in 2018 on the Senate level, Jackie Rosen and Dean Heller were in a pretty close race as well. Jackie Rosen ended up winning by a margin of 5%, and again, the polls really did not overestimate the Democratic Party. However, on the presidential level, yes, the polls did overestimate Joe Biden a little bit, as they did in very many states. Joe Biden won Nevada by 2.4%. He was up by 5.3% according to the polls. So yes, the polls did overestimate Biden a little bit on the presidential level, but if you look at the previous governors and Senate races here in Nevada, the polls really have not been too far off, and so that is why the lead currently for Steve Sisolak in 2022 is still pretty significant. I think right now Steve Sisolak is in a good position going into his re-election, and yes, the abortion issue is going to help him out, and it has helped him out. If you look at the betting odds for this race, currently Steve Sisolak has a 52% chance of winning, 47 for the Republicans, and I mean, if you look at where Sisolak's numbers jumped up here, you'll see it was right after Roe v. Wade was overturned in late June, and Joe Lombardo has come out in support of Roe v. Wade being overturned, and that is going to be an issue for him. I mean, these governors are going to have a major say in the abortion laws for each individual state in the coming years, not the U.S. Senate, so the abortion issue is going to affect these gubernatorial elections a lot more, and so that is why the Democratic Party is now actually favored in the state of Nevada. The polling numbers also suggest this, a margin of 1.3% on average according to the latest polls released between Joe Lombardo and Steve Sisolak. So right now I'm going to fill in the state of Nevada as being lean for the Democratic Party. And now the next state we're going to take a look at is the state of Michigan, in which Gretchen Whitmer has become one of the most infamous governors in the entire country. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she was very unpopular, and there was even a plot to kidnap her. However, right now, Gretchen Whitmer is in a much better position than expected in terms of winning her second term in office. In 2018, she had a relatively easy victory against Bill Schuette, winning the race by almost double digits. However, this time around, Gretchen Whitmer is also in a pretty favorable position. If you look at the Republican primary right now, basically what happened was James Craig was disqualified from appearing on the ballot due to not submitting enough valid signatures, and so as a result of this, Tudor Dixon, Ryan Kelly, Kevin Rinke, and Garrett Soldano were the 4 major candidates remaining. They went from having a single-digit support all the way to becoming now the frontrunners in this race, because of course James Craig was disqualified, and currently Tudor Dixon is the frontrunner with a 2 in 3 chance at winning the Republican nomination, but still there is a 1 in 3 chance that he does not end up winning the nomination. So right now the GOP primary is still very much a toss-up between these 4 candidates, as of course a plurality of voters in Michigan are still undecided as to who they support. But if Tudor Dixon comes out as the nominee, he is still 10% below Gretchen Whitmer in terms of the polling. If you look at the most recent polls released here, Gretchen Whitmer leads by pretty significant margins against every single Republican that she may face on the ballot this November. If you looked at the polling just a couple of months ago in late May, she led by over 30 points compared to every single opponent that she may face as the Republican nominee. And I mean, this is mainly a result of the fact that these candidates simply have no name recognition in the state at all, because of the fact, I mean, they really only have a chance at winning this nomination because James Craig was disqualified. And I mean, James Craig was going to give Gretchen Whitmer a run for her money. If you look at the race previously before Craig was disqualified, it was basically a pure toss-up between Gretchen Whitmer and James Craig. This was one of the most competitive races of the year, and Gretchen Whitmer was a very vulnerable Democrat going into their re-election. But right now, as a result of the disqualification, the Democratic Party with Gretchen Whitmer has a 77% chance at winning the Michigan gubernatorial election, and her odds have just been climbing more and more since the disqualification. And so right now, Gretchen Whitmer is in a very good position going into her re-election. I think she is almost guaranteed to win at this point, but right now the only question is what type of margin she wins by. There is a chance she does win by around double digits like she did last time. However, you know, the Michigan is going to be closer than last time in my opinion. I think that in the end, the generic ballot and how it favors the GOP so much by itself is going to make this race a lot more competitive, no matter who the Republican nomination ends up winning. But I do think that Gretchen Whitmer is going to end up winning by more than 5%. I do think it will be a pretty comfortable victory for her, but still, this will be a relatively competitive race in the end as well after a Republican nominee is chosen. So right now in the state of Michigan, I am going to categorize it as being likely for the Democrats. I mean, basically all the polls suggest right now that Gretchen Whitmer is significantly ahead. We're just going to have to see if she will be able to hold on to her very steady lead over the next couple of months. And so now we have two states left to look at on this map, the states of Texas and Arizona. Texas may be a bit more promising for the Democratic Party than previously thought. If you look at the most recent poll released from the state of Texas, it does show Greg Abbott up by just 5 points, the two latest polls released by YouGov. Now, looking at the Texas race, it will be a race between Greg Abbott, who is running for his re-election, and Beto O'Rourke, who is the Democratic nominee, and of course, he is famous for almost defeating Ted Cruz in 2018. So in 2018, it was a very close Senate race. It was basically embarrassing for the Republican Party, I mean, to only win Texas by 2.6%. Ted Cruz almost lost Texas for the GOP, and this is the closest the Democratic Party had gone to winning a major statewide race in Texas in decades. I mean, the last time the Democratic Party won Texas on the presidential level was Jimmy Carter in 1976. So Texas has been a Republican stronghold state for a very long time, but the GOP's grip on the state really has been loosening in recent years, and Beto O'Rourke was a major cause of that. And so right now, looking at the polls, yes, Beto O'Rourke is down on average by 7.8%, but if you look at the Senate polls released in 2018 in the state of Texas, you'll see that Beto O'Rourke was not doing well either. If you look at the final polls released here, Ted Cruz was ahead in every single poll that was released by around 4 to 10%. So the race was pretty much going to be a pretty solid victory for Ted Cruz in the state of Texas, basically the same margin that we're seeing right now for Greg Abbott. I do expect, though, that Beto O'Rourke is going to lose. I think realistically, he does not have a chance at winning this race, but I do think that he can outperform the polls again. This year, he is polling at basically the same margin that he was in 2018, and so that does make it a bit more promising for Beto O'Rourke, but still, this is a race that he is heavily disadvantaged in. Texas is still a state with a very long Republican voting history. However, the abortion issue may help Beto O'Rourke out a little bit because, of course, Texas is a state that has permanently outbanned abortions completely, and there's still a huge chunk of the Texas population that is pro-choice. It is still one of the biggest states in the entire country, so I do think that Greg Abbott is going to face a pretty strong challenge from Beto O'Rourke nonetheless. But Greg Abbott and Beto O'Rourke both won their primaries pretty easily. If you look at the GOP primary, Greg Abbott won with 66% of the vote, and I mean, he had a whole ton of Republicans challenging him. He still ended up winning every single county in the state. Beto O'Rourke had an even stronger primary victory, winning 91% of the vote in Texas. So really, both candidates are very popular within their own parties, and I think that in the end, the race is going to be around leaning to likely for the GOP. I do not believe it will go into the double digits, but I do think Texas in the end will still end up voting for Greg Abbott by around 7.8%. I think that would be the max range, to be honest. I do think that Beto O'Rourke can make this race a bit more competitive. He is still a very good nominee on paper, but right now the state of Texas does still heavily favor the Republican Party, and if you do look at the betting odds for this race, you will see that currently the Democratic Party only has an 11% chance at victory here, 89 for Greg Abbott in his re-election. And if you go on 538, you'll see that 538 currently gives Greg Abbott a 96% chance at winning his re-election. So basically, 538 has been very favorable to the incumbents. I mean, in the state of Michigan that we just looked at earlier, Gretchen Whitmer has a 92% chance at winning her re-election. In Nevada, 57% that it goes to Steve Sisolak, and of course in Georgia, 86% that it goes to Brian Kemp. So the incumbents that we've looked at in the last couple of minutes here are all heavily favored in all of their races. But right now, Texas, I think, will be a little bit more competitive than what the polling really suggests. But right now, still, I'm going to categorize it as being likely for the GOP just based on the most recent polls alone. And the final state in which we've seen new polls come out of is the state of Arizona. This is the only race we're going to look at in this video without an incumbent running for their re-election. And this, of course, is because in 2018, Doug Ducey was re-elected to a second term by almost a solid margin against David Garcia. And as a result, this time around, without an incumbent in this race, Arizona is going to be a lot more competitive than it was before. The Democratic Party has a very good chance at flipping the Arizona governorship this November. If you look at the last couple of elections in Arizona, if you look at the presidential election in 2020, Joe Biden won Arizona for the first time for the Democratic Party since 1996. I mean, you go back to 2012, it voted for Mitt Romney by 9%. On the Senate level, the Democratic Party now controls both Senate seats in Arizona, with Mark Kelly winning in 2020 and Kyrsten Sinema winning in 2018. So really, Arizona is not the red state that it once was. It very much is a purple state at this point, and it is similar to the state of Georgia and what Texas is going to become in a couple of years. If you look at the Democratic primary on the gubernatorial level right now, Katie Hobbs Hobbs is expected to become the Democratic nominee. She is the current Secretary of State and played a big role in not allowing Donald Trump to overturn the election in Arizona. That has made her pretty well known in the state. While on the Republican side, we have a very close race between Kari Lake, the Trump-endorsed candidate who represents the Trump wing of the Republican Party, and Karen Taylor Robinson, who represents the much more moderate wing of the Republican Party. And currently, Karen Taylor Robinson does have the momentum on her side. If you look at the most recent polling, her numbers, this is the blue line here, have gone up significantly over the last couple of months, and she did get the endorsement of Matt Salmon, who ended up dropping out of the race. He was the last candidate besides these two to stay in the race, and right now it is a very close race between both Kari Lake and Taylor Robinson. Currently, Taylor Robinson has a 37% chance at winning the nomination, 63% for Kari Lake, so it is going to be a very close race nonetheless, but whoever ends up winning, they are both currently polling behind Katie Hobbs. If you look at the most recent poll released a couple of days ago, this is Democratic sponsored. Katie Hobbs leads by 5 points against Karen Taylor Robinson and by 9% against Kari Lake. So clearly, Katie Hobbs does much better against Kari Lake, and Kari Lake, I think, is the weaker candidate, and that's not too surprising because, of course, she does represent the more extreme wing of the Republican Party. If you look at the other previous poll released in the month of May, this one was sponsored by the Katie Hobbs campaign. Katie Hobbs only led by 1% against Taylor Robinson and by 5% against Kari Lake. So I think that Katie Hobbs right now would want Kari Lake to end up winning the nomination. This would just be another one of the terrible nominees that Donald Trump has endorsed and helped to win. But I do think that right now Katie Hobbs is in an okay position going to her election. I think definitely Arizona is going to be a very competitive race nonetheless. But really at this point, it is a pure toss-up. If you look at the betting odds here, the GOP does have a slight advantage, but their odds have been going down significantly over the last couple of weeks. I mean, their odds went from 70 all the way down now to 58. The Democratic Party's odds went from 29 all the way up now to 44. So the Democratic Party has seen a pretty strong shift in their favor over the last couple of weeks in the Arizona gubernatorial election. This mainly is a result of the fact that Kari Lake does seem like she might end up winning the nomination, which is worrying for the Republican Party that wants to end up winning this race. And of course, Arizona is another state that may ban abortion rights, and of course, with abortion being a major issue for these gubernatorial elections, it will help Katie Hobbs as well, as of course she is going to be the one and that will prevent abortions from being banned in the state. So Arizona right now is going to be leaning for the Democratic Party just based on the latest polls that we have seen. And so filling in the rest of the map here, Oregon, I'm also going to fill in as being lean for the Democratic Party in favor of Tina Kotek. Michelle Lujan Grisham in New Mexico as being lean for Democrats as well. State of Kansas, I currently have as being lean for the GOP. I have the states of Minnesota and Pennsylvania both as being lean for Democrats, as well as Maine. And Wisconsin, currently, I feel that it is going to be a tilt race for the Democratic Party. So right now, the gubernatorial elections are very, very close. And the latest polls suggest pretty good numbers for the Democrats in both Michigan and Nevada, as well as Arizona. And the Republicans are still leading pretty strongly in the states of Texas and Georgia. And thank you guys so much for watching this video. These are the latest polls that have been released for the 2022 gubernatorial elections. We've seen a lot of new polls come out, and I'll update you guys on any new numbers that come out in the next couple of weeks here. So thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.